Welcome to Big Hearted Indy, where we empower men in Indianapolis to forge deep connections and impactful lives through authentic friendships and service. Join us as we explore personal growth, community leadership, and the transformative power of living out our faith. The podcast is produced by Citizen 7. Check out our new website at citizen7indy.com. And it is hosted by Greg Enos, Don Palmer, and I am Chris Spangle. And today, our guests are actually going to be Don Palmer and Steve Cosler. And our special guest host is Aaron Story, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Elevate Indianapolis. Greg is on the road today. Don, tell us a little bit about why we are honored to have Aaron here as our guest host. Why'd you choose him?
Well, Aaron and Steve and I labored away when Elevate Indy was a really small organization. And Aaron was a guy that came to a job interview and you thought, this guy isn't like looking for a job. This is like a calling. He already says this has got my name all written over it. So Aaron is a fun guy. He's a basketball coach. He has a robust family life, and he knows Steve and I very well by working in the trenches with us. So I thought he would be a good host.
Great. And if you're watching on Zoom, we record this live, so you can participate. Leave your questions and comments in the Zoom chat. If you're watching it later on the podcast and YouTube feeds, then check out heartbeat.chat, where we have the events, and you can leave. It's basically our online directory of everybody that participates in Citizen 7, and you get exclusive notifications of when this will air live, usually recorded the fourth Monday of every month. So who are Don Palmer and Steve Cosler? We're going to start with that just a little bit, but Steve is a Purdue graduate born and raised in central Indiana and operating partner of Water Street Healthcare Partners, LLC. And Don is currently the managing member of Honey Creek Capital. He has a BS degree from the Krannert School of Business at Purdue University and an MBA from Xavier University. And he is an adjunct professor of entrepreneurship in the Lacey School of Business at Butler University. And he also is an elder at Second Presbyterian. And you enjoy playing golf and spending time with your wife, Carolyn, and your three grandchildren. Well, six grandchildren and your three children, excuse me.
Yeah, 6 grandchildren, one on the way in October. Pretty
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So that's the brief introduction, Aaron, but really we're here to talk about Steve and Don's friendship of 50 years. And I'm going to hand it over to you to ask that first question.
Yeah, so when obviously it reached out and Don had this idea, let's talk about friendship and relationship for 50 years. And that's pretty unique. And the depth of relationship and the depth of impact together is very unique. So I'd love to be in on that conversation and pass some questions. But just start with, where did you meet? Just the basic roots. We're going to get into the highs and lows and the impact, but just the very basics. Take us back 50 plus years ago, and where did y'all two meet? Obviously, as young men or teenagers, or how did it go? Share.
Well, Aaron, thank you. Don and I met, and actually it's D, okay? And I'll call him that throughout this podcast, because that's what I've called him for 50 years. So D and I met at the Sigma Chi House at Purdue University. I was a freshman, he was a sophomore, so I was going through Rush. And I was at a Rush event in the Great Hall at the Sigma Chi House, and this guy came up to me, introduced himself, and we spent about 15 minutes just chatting. And I remember to this day, I walked away and go, I think I could really be a good friend of this guy. And that was prescient. And that's where it all started.
What were those qualities about him that attracted you initially, you think?
I think warm, interested in me. Asking a lot of questions about, where'd you go to high school and what are you majoring in? Why are you majoring in that? What do you like to do? And it somewhere in that conversation, it probably came up that he was a Christian and that we shared a faith, and that was really important.
Well, look, Don, how do you remember that first meeting?
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm sure that there was a lot of beer there. I'm sure it was it was a Rush function. And so you have all these people, that you're trying to meet and who you're going to have for your next class of 20. But I remember that encounter.
Yeah. What were they? I mean, did you just walk up to everybody and introduce yourself? Did you pick him out?
Pretty good at that.
Yeah. That initial invitation, what was that process like for you? Were you
I
doing
think it
that
was very random. Yeah. It was just, you brought a bunch of, we might have had 35 people there, and our pledge class was probably 20-some people, 60 people in the house. Probably 40 or 50 of those were attending.
Did Steve make it?
He did make it.
He did.
It was
make
close. It was close. No one dropped a black ball.
Right.
So nobody said, I can't level with that guy.
So when you're are you roommates? How does I didn't go to a fraternity. I don't know about you.
Didn't either.
Yeah. So what does that formation look like in terms of friendships in that process?
So your freshman year, at least this is the way it is at Purdue. Your freshman year, you don't live in the fraternity house. So your sophomore year, you move in, and second semester, we had become fast friends. Second semester, sophomore year, we're going to be roommates.
Right.
And so room 4 in the Sigma Chi house is where we resided together and had a lot of fun, and you get to know someone pretty well when you're roommates.
Yeah. Right.
The good, the bad, and the ugly.
I wasn't known to be the neatest guy in the world.
Oh, really?
We can get into those stories.
We'll wait.
We've got time. We've got time.
Are you a neat Nick, or did he drive?
I don't know. We'd go as far as being the odd couple, Felix and Oscar, that kind of a thing.
He's neater.
But I'm neater. But the bar is pretty low. We're talking about that.
Are you still that way, Don?
I still am, unfortunately.
How did you two navigate tensions in those early days, especially when you're younger and you're maybe a little more hot-headed than you might be at 70, right? Like, how did you two work through conflict as roommates?
I don't think we really had much in the way of conflict. I think that was a Ozzie and Harriet kind of upbringing. Everything seemed he came from a small high school, but local. He grew up in West Lafayette. I grew up here in Indianapolis and went to North Central. But we had 3 or 4. Tom Morales of the Morales Group was a very close friend. Pat Lair, that ran the IU Simon Cancer Center, was a good friend of ours. A guy named Bill Freege, who has Freege Easy Water, was in kind of our little circle, and we had just a lot of laughs. I don't know what we laughed all about, but it seemed like humor was the oil to a lot of those friendships.
There were a few practical jokes along the way.
What was the best one?
Oh, yeah.
That you can talk about.
I can remember when Dee hosed down Freege's room from outside the Sig house, and Freege was a neat Nick. And having a full stream of water coming in the window didn't go over real well.
Oh, no. What's the one you're most proud of?
Well, I think, as I remember, there was a shaving cream thing that we put in an envelope and stuck just barely under the door, and then you stomped on it, which then would force all the shaving cream into the person's room. That was a pretty good one.
That was a popular trick.
Yeah, this seems to, in conversations with you, Don, fun seems to be such an important, not only part of what you believe in, but I think in terms, men kind of need good, clean fun, in terms of lubricating friendship. Let's talk about that. Like, as you reflect on your 50-year friendship, what role has fun played in it? How do you define that?
Well, first of all, Steve and I started a Young Life Club at Harrison High School. And that was, there had never been a club there. There had been one in West Lafayette. And a couple other buddies, this is Mike Espinlaw from Evansville. So there were silly skits, like really dumb skits. And they were just hilarious. And to start with, you'd think, oh, we were so successful. I think the first meeting, there was 4 people. I mean, you go, how do you do a skit for like 4 people? How do you give a talk?
Hope they laugh.
Right.
Yeah, a hawk talk. So I think that kind of wholesome fun that Young Life was part of the vehicle for helped.
And interestingly, we brought some of those skits to the SIG house.
Yeah.
And when we'd have some kind of an event with a sorority or something, we used some of those same many of those same Young Life skits at the Sigma Chi house to entertain the group. So
now in my brain, I'm going, oh, that sounds so vulnerable. Like, I guess vulnerability is the thing that I think younger people would look at that and go, what if I am terrible? What if I'm not funny? What blah, blah, blah. How do you, in those early days, especially when you're younger and coming up in your career, how did you encourage each other to be more vulnerable with each other and maybe other people?
Well, I think there was a lot of kidding, and I think there was so much diversity, right? I mean, you had one guy that was doing, say, a navigator's Bible study, and another guy that all he cared about whether there was going to be malt liquor for the beer or regular beer, and it was just this incredible diversity, and it really made you try to be more tolerant and kind of like embrace, hey, what's the good part of that person? So I think doing like a service kind of a thing, like Young Life together, feeling like you made some progress, but you had some fun, and you also had a cadence of frequency in terms of being together.
yeah, one of the creeds of Sigma Chi is men of different temperaments, talents, and convictions, and we certainly had that at the Sigma Chi house. But I think that, to Don's point, across everybody, there was a great deal of respect. So regardless of what side of things you were on, there was mutual respect, and we're going to get along and work together because we're all in this thing together.
Yeah. So beyond college, right? At what point did you two separate as roommates?
I think
Soon after that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
you pretty much changed roommates every semester.
yeah.
Right.
But obviously you're in the same house, so we're still spending a lot of time together.
So then you probably left college first. You were a year older, right?
Yes, I was a year older, and then I ended up leaving a semester early. So I went to work for Xerox Corporation in Indianapolis. Kaz was still in college, so he was there for an additional year.
Why would anyone leave college a semester early?
To go work.
That's really a great question. And, there's a lot of questions that I haven't been able to answer in my life. That is still one of them.
Did you get away with any?
What were you thinking,
Any
partner?
pranks at Xerox?
Different culture, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm guessing.
No shaving cream tricks.
White
Probably wouldn't
shirts,
accept
right.
us. Yeah.
heavy starch.
Right.
Yeah.
Probably no jeans.
So talk about, as you leave college and you separate physical proximity, what steps do you then take to maintain connection?
Well, I would say, Chris, one of the most important things in any relationship that's going to be long-term and close is consistency of being together. And that might not be physically. It'd be great if it was. But talking on the, back then it's talking on the phone, right?
Right.
Because, and trying as best you can to get together physically, whether it's for a ball game or a round of golf or having dinner with wives or girlfriends or whatever it is. But you have to have a consistency of getting together and communicating. Incredibly important. And when I got out of school, got married, and end up working for IBM, moving to Louisville, Kentucky. Don was in Cincinnati. We saw each other some, not that far. But we always stayed in touch. And then as my career advanced at IBM, I had a chance. I was going to get promoted to my first management job. And they told me, we've got two options for you, Grand Rapids or Indianapolis. I think I'll take Indianapolis.
Was that because of Don?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it was a factor.
Yeah.
That Don, as well as others that had been in my life from college, and family is in West Lafayette. My wife's family's in Bloomington, Illinois. So Indianapolis is a pretty good location. But But obviously then moved back to Indianapolis, and it's easy to get together.
Let's talk about getting together, right? Because I have a 5 and a 1-year-old that I don't want to leave, right? Like, I really enjoy being around them, and I like our routines, and friendship at this point in our life has kind of taken a back seat in so much of what we do. It has become harder. You know, we're in the phase of life where you go, all right, yeah, we can get together, but it's going to be 3 months from now we have one specific day in November, right? So as you both had families and careers, how did you balance that in those early days of making sure that you got together? Was getting together once a year? Was that once a month? What was the intentionality and the rhythm that you had there?
I don't know that we had any hard fast. We did buy Purdue basketball tickets together, maybe 10 years out of college, that we still...
1985,
Yeah.
first year.
So
will be
that
the 40th year.
Yeah, we would meet at a truck stop in Zionsville. We'd drop a car. We'd go to a particular to Waltz or a certain place for a burger, and then go to the game. And that created some regularity to the relationship, and we both enjoyed Purdue basketball. So I think that helped a lot. We also have sons that are within 3 or 4 years of each other.
Right.
And so I think that there was times where we also said, hey, let's bring the boys to the game. Let's go do something.
So shooting at
Yeah.
somebody's farm. I can't remember whose it was, but
Of those things of saying, all right, let's combine family and fun. And I think not so much with the girls. Number one, there was a bigger age range, but I think that was an advantage to have. We each only had one son, and so that gave us a good excuse to get together.
Now that you're more advanced in your careers and life stages, what does that rhythm look like now in terms of time together?
well, certainly, and we spent 15 years because of my job in Florida. Lived in the Orlando area, and still spend a good portion of the winter down in Florida. There's rarely a week that will go by that we're not at least on the phone or doing something. And obviously when we're in town together, or the Palmers spend a month in Florida every spring, we're trying to get together.
And feel free to jump in here at any,
I'd
any
be
point.
curious.
Go ahead and interrupt.
At what point was there? This is obviously a lot of this is a natural progression of relationship and very positive. At what point was there life adversity that came in? Do you think generally what builds deeper bonds in relationships? Ball games are great, right? Shared life experience at college ages, kids together at different stages. Was there a point you can remember that we faced some adversity individually? I don't mean relationship. And then it was like, I really need somebody to lean into because this is bigger than my capacity to handle. Was there any part of your story that really helped where I really had to lean on him and I could count on him? And then I needed a brother.
Yeah.
Often.
I would say, I was single through my 20s. And he got married right out of college. And I think, going to Cincinnati, being a single guy, in terms of kind of meeting your friend at their greatest need, he and his wife, Lynn, set me up several times with, hey, in other words, this guy needs a good gal, and here she is. So I think from that standpoint of seeing a need, all of a sudden several of your friends, are now having kids, and they've been married for 6 or 8 years. But I started a business, in the Jimmy Carter era, where interest rates were 18% for inventory and 13% for consumer rates. Those were some really tough times. And I remember he bought a black Cutlass from me. I think it was a 77.
1985.
Yeah, exactly. It was a used car. So I think having that adversity of starting that business, and then you had a lot of challenges just climbing the ladder at IBM.
Yeah, I had the tension of kind of wanting the family to be in one spot, and investing there and being with a company who at the time, the joke acronym was IBM stood for I've been moved. And so we moved 5 times in the first 12 years or whatever. And, should I leave IBM and do something? I was attracted to small businesses and I spent a lot of time with Don talking about that. And how do I make that decision? When's the right time to make that decision? What's the criteria for which I should think about making that switch? And then finally in 1992, I did. And that put us in Indianapolis. We kind of thought permanently. And then...
and what was the company? Give for context for who made that decision. First
Benefit, good friend of mine, Greg Bell. Don knows Greg well. He had a company in healthcare that was growing fast, and he said, need some help with professional management, and you've gotten all that training through your IBM career. And so I jumped in there, and then in 97, and that company was sold a couple of years later, and in 1997, I joined a subsidiary of Bentley Western. 1996 I joined. In 97 I started commuting to Florida. And then 1999 we moved. And so again, I can't tell you how many conversations through all that kind of that trauma of, am I doing the right thing? Is this good for the kids? Is it going to be okay for the family? And all those things. I leaned on him all the time.
And you had a situation where after a business had been acquired, they basically kind of let you go.
Yeah, they said, we don't need that position anymore. You're done.
So you call it let go, call it fired. That'll give a shock to the system.
Regardless of what they call it, you've been rejected.
Yeah.
Right. And it was a dark period of call it a year, not quite a year, but a dark period before I was leaning on him the whole time.
And I lost the car dealerships. I had 3 car dealerships. Chrysler went bankrupt in 2009. And, you get a call. You've been in the business for 52 years or something. You get a call from Chrysler, from somebody in Detroit, says, my name's John Jones, and you don't know me, but you didn't make our list, and we're eliminating 800 dealers, and both of your stores are on that list. And in 3 weeks, you'll no longer be a Chrysler dealer. Now, you want to get something that has a big jolt to the system. And I remember, Steve, I was just kind of shell-shocked. You'd had this successful business. Now you have the business. You have real estate that's empty. People are, all your employees are running for the hills because you're not going to be in business. And he took me out to the, what was that fish place? I was right there. Anyway, it was one of those kind of hot fish places, and we were sitting there, and he turned over a napkin, and he said, because I was concerned, am I going to make it? What's going to happen to me? And he says, okay, well, tell me what you own and what you owe, and tell me what you got coming in, and, asked several questions. And he says, hey, I think you're going to be okay. And maybe I knew that I was going to be okay, but in terms of just being totally vulnerable and feeling like, wow, I was kind of the guy that was helping others, and now I am on my back. And to have a close friend that was that, number one, that the shame of what happened, that you're willing to kind of put yourself out, and then for that person to just come alongside you, I think really helped forge the friendship. I can remember when you had a health issue in Florida, where all of a sudden, a back issue that could have been not life-threatening, but maybe
debilitating.
Yeah. And for someone to call you and share that something that vulnerable, it makes you, you realize how sacred that is or how special that is.
Yeah, I think you have to have a lot of trust in each other, right? To have those moments where, look, I'm going to bare my soul, and you're going to keep me accountable or just help me stay sane. What I heard in that story was just a constant in your life going, you're going to be okay, right? Which is important, but trust, the continued presence, just to kind of recap and summarize what I've heard, correct me if I'm wrong, but just intentional presence with each other leading to trust that allows you to be open in these moments and be vulnerable. And then let's take that a step further. Were there times where one of you held the other accountable? I mean, especially from a Christian perspective?
I think another word that goes with vulnerability is transparency. They're very similar in that respect. We've always been incredibly transparent. And one thing that guys don't like to talk about is money. They don't like to share that. And we pretty much know what our balance sheets look like, if you will. And the accountability there has been, are we being good stewards? And multiple times having the discussion about our stewardship. And I've learned a tremendous amount from Dee on stewardship, how to think about it and how to make those judgments, how to build that criteria, and how to invest, because I prefer to think about my stewardship as investment and not just charity. That sounds like we're just giving something away, and I think the Lord wants us to invest. So we've challenged each other there for sure.
I think a great question for friends to ask each other is, how have your parents and grandparents showed up in your life relative to money? That's a really interesting discussion. Steve's father died when he was 18. And his mother was a church secretary, and what she did to cobble things together and to make it, and, his perspective on money, me being, my father was a Depression kind of kid. He started in an inner city dealership. I was running a dealership that I had no idea whether it had been bankrupt before and, whether I was going to make it or not. So I think both of us have always had the mindset of not betting on the future, spending less than we make, and then having a perspective of how do we make the biggest impact. That I was on the microfinance board, Opportunity International. Their slogan is giving the working poor a working chance. Those are in third world countries, mostly people that make $2 a day or less. It was on that, was fascinated by that. Steve became interested in it, and when I got off the board, Steve went on it. So I think that there was some philosophies of, we believe in impact, we believe in measurement, we believe that as good stewards, we need to be sure that we're getting as good a bang for a buck as to what our portion. We can't save the world, but there is something that we should be doing. And I think also stewardship of time, that I've learned from Steve that it's not just writing a check, or your check has more zeros on it than mine, but are you willing to come alongside a ministry or a not-for-profit and ask the kind of marketplace questions that you do in your job every day, and do it in a non-judgmental way? It's just very powerful, and really what not-for-profits and ministries need is a fresh set of eyes.
It's good. So I think what the uniqueness of the relationship, what you're hearing, is different seasons, different purposes, both some hard times, some joyful times. You think about over the course of 50 years, you see this picture of, because you even talked about your transparent having a 5 and a 1-year-old. Friendship looks different, right? I had 3 under the age of 5. I had fundamentally very few friends. It was in survival mode as a dad, working. I was planting a church at the time. And, right, you have these seasons, and yet friendship can be bigger than that season. At the same point, I have to make friendship bigger than the season. Yeah. Like it's a conscious, intentional choice to, I've got to outlast this season maybe, so I can make sure that, but it's a call, it's a game, it's an activity, but it's also stewardship. It's thoughtfulness, to your point of the purpose of 50 years of friendship and God's faithfulness to you, the way he has been, as well, then there's a sense of return of investment together. So when you look at that kind of picture of relationship and you're thinking about audiences, we're all different stages. Many people that will be like, amen, yes, we've been with you, we're our own. Others that are maybe 25, 26 at different seasons. What does that look? How does that translate to, if they didn't do Greek life together, they didn't do, how does that translate some takeaways? Because there's so much in there that is just incredibly rich. But how's it tangibly? What do I do as men that need I've got the picture of it, but I need a prescription a little bit to make sure I prioritize this over the course of first steps that just maybe it is late 40s or late 20s, because there's a lot in here that's powerful.
Yeah. Well, I think, one, get it on the calendar. So as why don't you get together with your close friends? It never gets on the calendar. It isn't like you don't like them. It isn't like they don't like you. But if you don't block some time, that, okay, you're going to block some time in a month. It may be for cause, it may be for 5 or 6 other friends, but it's for close friend time. And that, one of the things he and I have enjoyed doing is walks. So we'll walk the Monon Trail. Well, it's interesting how you have some deeper conversations or some different conversations by just walking together versus sitting in a coffee shop. Mm-hmm. So certainly I think, and then I think to be a good question asker to your friend. How many times have you been with somebody and you go, I got together with this guy. He never asked me one question. I remember Kaz talking about, a well-known CEO of a Fortune 100 company, terrific guy and this and that. But he said, he never asked me one question. And so I think that having those questions of what's the best thing that's happened to you in the last 30 days? What's the worst thing? Professionally, family, personal. All of a sudden, I asked that to a buddy of mine, and he started telling me about a friend of his that had significant mental illness and, is in pretty tough shape. Well, this is a guy I normally play golf with. But by asking that question, we really got to, wow, here's some pretty important things going on in your life.
Mm-hmm. I had someone say to me, when somebody asks, how are you doing? Tell the truth. Don't just say good. Steve, what's...
Well, I was going to say, Aaron, maybe even a step back is I think a lot of men don't have really close friends, period. And, so how do you find a good close friend? And I think, it certainly started with common interests. I mean, we were fraternity brothers and we both liked sports or golf or Purdue or whatever it was that kind of pulls you together. And then you start to ask you spend time together and you start to ask those questions and really get to know each other. And you let that friendship evolve. I can still recall years ago, someone that I worked with, that's what our relationship was, a working relationship. And we went to lunch and he started telling me about some problems he was having with his marriage and, what do I think? And I said, and honestly, I thought about, well, if I was in this situation, I'd be calling D. I said, well, I always found getting together with probably my closest friends to really share this, my closest friend to share this and to talk through it. And he goes, that's what I'm doing. Mm. And the shock that, I obviously wanted to, okay, I'm going to engage here. But I was really surprised that he would count me as his closest friend.
Because the measure of relationship is very different from your picture of a close friend.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's just a void in so many guys' life, and it comes back to intentionality and making sure that you're carving out the time for someone.
Do you think the bar was just too low for him and a lot of people? I
just don't think. I think there's a lot of people that have not had those kind of relationships where they are vulnerable, they are transparent, and
I think in some instances, people have they have that great friend in their life. It just really hasn't been nurtured. I remember a buddy of mine, Jim Dodson. I hope he hears this thing. And we were riding motorcycles, and he doesn't ride a motorcycle very often. I love riding, but don't ride that often. But he said, "Hey, I just like to go out and ride with you for the day, so we could have more time to spend together." I didn't even know that he really wanted to spend any time together, right? I mean, having that kind of, hey, it would be great. I really enjoy spending time with you. So, finding something that you both enjoy, I think, is key. Letting someone know, I don't think you can be really great friends to more than 3 or 4. So, an action step could be, who are your top 3 folk? And just having some intentionality. Like instead of how are you doing, David Brooks in his book, How to Know a Person, which I would highly recommend the book, but, recommended a question of what's working well for you right now, Chris, in your life? Or what's giving you joy outside of work? All of a sudden, I don't know anybody, and all of a sudden they say, "Hey, I'm a beekeeper," or I was talking to a guy today. He says, I said, "Podcast, how could someone listen to a podcast for like Joe Rogan for 2 hours?" He says, this was Jay Height from Shepherd Community this morning. He says, "Well, I listened to a 4.5 hour history, deep dive in history." I'm thinking, man, I'm totally out of it. But
I know what podcast Jay's talking about. I'm going to email him right now.
But that kind of a question, right? What right now, Aaron, is a real challenge for you? And to hear somebody say, it's not my job, it's such and such. It's my wife and I keeping or hey, my youngest, whatever it might be. So I know I could always be a better listener, and I think I could always be a better questioner. So,
before we take questions, please jump in the chat if you're on Zoom and leave a question. We do have one from Mr. Kevin Titchener here in just a second. But I want to talk about faith. I think faith has been privatized so much to a point that people are almost afraid to talk about it even with close friends. It sounds like that was a part of the initial conversation, which 50 years ago may have been more open. Right now, maybe it's like, oh, maybe there's some risk if I say I go to this church or that church, right? We may accidentally talk about politics, right? There's a lot of, I think, right or wrong risk in that. But how important has faith been to both of you, and how do you two talk about it, maybe initially and then as you grow deeper in your faith and in your relationship with each other?
We don't go to the same church, and we're not in a small group or anything. But faith has always been a constant through our relationship. It's kind of been a given. Now, not to say we were perfect Christians or any of that kind of thing, but we were on the journey, and we knew who Jesus was, and we knew what he did on the cross, and we knew our relationship to that, and we also knew that we wanted to try to follow his leading and respond to his love. So I think that idea of praying for each other and knowing that other person is really taking that seriously has been a big impact. And I think trying to live out that, too much is given, much is expected. And the whole 5 talents, we talk a lot about the parable of the talents, that, hey, we've been given great opportunities. We were able to, maximize some of those opportunities, but have been surrounded with incredible friends, with healthy children, with grandchildren. All right, what do we do coming from a position of health and vitality to serve others? And I think that is based in our faith, in our journey of that's, as Christians, that's what we're supposed to do.
Amen. Very important. And I can recall I had become a Christian in August of 73. And, within 2 months, within 30 days, probably, I'm meeting Don. and other guys at the Sigma Chi house. And I could see that there was you're a new Christian trying to figure out what's this all about. And I could see that there were other guys of faith at the house. And I knew, okay, this is probably going to be a pretty good place for me. And then Don invites me to help with Young Life, and that really helped to blossom my growth as a Christian. So from the beginning, we had that going. It was part of the basis of the relationship, and it has been all the way through. And I think having the commonality of faith, to me, is critically important to really, really close friendship. That doesn't mean you can't be a good friend to a lot of other people, and we both mentored people about jobs and everything else. And, you can share a lot of good advice and life advice, but when you get down to the real issues of life, the tough ones, if you can't both lean back on your faith and reference things that, Scripture and pray for each other, I think it would be tough without that.
Is there a confessional element in your relationship?
Well, yeah. I mean, we're vulnerable with each other.
Yeah.
So it's fortunately we haven't had a lot of big ones to confess.
Right.
But, we know what each other's thinking.
Yeah. And highly imperfect people. And I think
Definitely.
we pray the prayer of help thou my unbelief. Like, Lord, you are faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love. How do you have love in our families? How do we have love as friends? Help my unbelief, because our faith underpinnings would say that the Holy Spirit helps you become, closer than a brother, right? I mean, that helps you have a Christ-like love that isn't anything that you've done on a personal development standpoint, but that you acknowledge that that's the way the Holy Spirit works in your life.
And we have lived life so closely together that we have celebrated, and we've talked about this many times as an encouragement of our faith. How I was blessed after I lost my job, how he was blessed after he lost his dealership. Those are confirmatory that we know so much about each other and have lived so closely together that you can celebrate that together and just praise God together for what he's done in your life.
Now, you two have not been privatized in your faith. You've lived it out. You're both on a lot of different boards. Elevated is a piece of that. You actively seek out the common good. How have you pushed each other? How would you define common good? I mean, is there a shared agreement on this is what will best help our community and loving our city? I mean, how does those conversations go, and how do you support each other in your work?
Well, I think we have some common thoughts in that area, and then I think we also have some independent thoughts in that area, which is good. That makes for a better mix and probably a broader impact. But one of my favorite verses is Hebrews 10:24. Let us encourage one another to love and good works. And there's nobody in my life that has done that more than Dee has for me. And I think I'm not a solo act, never have been in my life. And so having a partner in some of these things just makes it more fun. It's more rich. And it's probably a better outcome. I'm not the smartest guy in the world. And so you get Dee and a couple others that you think have something going, and you get everybody's brains together, and you really can do some good and do something good for the city.
I think sometimes I avoid pain. So I live in a comfortable house. I have a comfortable lifestyle, right? So you can avoid pain, and I do that too often. But I think to be willing to expose yourself to people that have disadvantages or that need a hand up. I think we both have really been about helping empower people, and the book When Helping Hurts that tried not to do it that way. We both, I think, have appreciated urban education and helping folk in an IPS kind of standpoint. I think microfinance has been, but he has a lot of divergent philanthropic things and totally different than mine. But I think it's kind of like, you know what, it's okay not to give to mine and me not to give to yours, but it's not okay not to be doing something for someone else. So I think that accountability of, there's times where I've written a check or gotten involved and thinking, you know, if that guy can do that, I ought to be able to do that. In other words, I think some peer quiet pressure in a positive way of there's other people doing good work. I need to step up and do that.
Yeah. Aaron's?
Yeah, I think about just that. It's interesting because you talked about both for your young discipleship, you went straight to service with Young Life. You know, you're in college, new Christian, probably didn't know the Johns of the Bible from each other, you know, learning that through service with community. And then you think about this 50 years later, we're service in community, you know, and the theme of that makes this further a very unique relationship. It's also a model of they shouldn't be separate. They should be separated. It's service and community and joy and stewarding talents, time, talent, treasure, you know, right together. And so you describe this relationship as the richness of it. Well, it's not a mystery why it's so rich, because, you know, are there transparent moments, or to your point of, is it confessional time? Well, there probably isn't needed to be as much because there's so much co-laboring, co-sharing with each other's balance sheets. That's a lot of transparency there. Sure, you know, right? We're calling each other to, like, how are you giving? How are you engaging? Are you serving? And so you think about that picture of itself over the course of time. Seasons look different, you know, right? When you're in Florida, probably look different than when you've been here the last 15 or 10 or so years back, you know, so to speak. But how does that translate again? So, because it is hard to find friends. I think of the number of college kids I talked to leave college having no friends. I mean, they had a college experience. It didn't leave with the same level of, and it is different today in the community. Community is different today.
There's no lonelier time for people than after college. It's
documented from the Surgeon General over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. It's the loneliest time in American history. And yet, in theory, we're more connected than we ever have been, which is a whole other conversation, another podcast for another day, you know, right? But what's a simple takeaway to be able to maintain service and a community in, you know, fellowship with the Lord and fellowship with one another that is transferable? Because you have there's a network here. There's a Citizen 7 network. There is, and there's purposefulness behind all of that, obviously, which connects to this friendship, you know, too. But what is a couple of takeaways that for a guy sitting on the couch and a Zoom at the desk, right, at the cubicle right now, that, yeah, well, I don't have that from college, so what do I do?
You know, one thing I think about, Aaron, is I can't remember what the name of the study was, but Henry Blackaby had this
Experiencing God.
Experiencing God.
Yeah.
And one of the takeaways from that is find out where God is working and jump in.
Join him.
And that's a pretty good, I've thought about that a lot. And somebody can figure out where they see God at work and making a difference and changing lives and go jump in. And one of the things that Don and I went to Bob Buford's halftime. It was a kind of a 24-hour, you know, deep dive
boot camp deal.
Yeah, with Bob Buford, and he always talked about. He called them low-cost probes, and a low-cost probe was you show up at some organization where I really think I've looked at the website. I kind of like what they're doing. I'm going to go visit. And he said, you know, he always said, he was very blunt. He'd go, I'd walk in, I'd say, I'm not going on your board and I'm not giving you a dime right now. I want to find out what you're doing and get to know you a little bit. And, you know, you do some of those things and you kind of figure out what your passions are. And if you're so blessed to have a great friend, you know, it's fun to do some of those things together.
That's good.
And I'd say take a small act. I mean, it could be something as simple as I was had a hip issue, and it's easy to be invisible, right? Because we're all working from our own homes, and it's like people have forgotten you. Just a simple text of, "Hey, I was wondering how your hip is." In other words, when it comes to friendship, it doesn't take a lot to all of a sudden kind of nurture some friendship. So I certainly would say act. And then, the problem is, you go, what do you need to say no to in order to say yes to this? So we've got 10 pounds of sugar in a 5-pound bag. You can't have one more to do. Okay, well, list your priorities, what you're spending time with. Let's say that there's 6 or 7. And then stack rank them. And then talk with a friend or your spouse or somebody and talk about the ones you rate 6 or 7. Because the fact of the matter is you probably should get rid of those in terms of your time to focus on the ones that are maybe 1 or 2.
Can I just real quick on this, and I'll get some questions probably. Sure. I think, and it's a future thing, I wonder, Don, the platform for Citizen 7 to cultivate that very act in a friendship base, where there's 50, 60 people there, because there's a gap of this occurring for all sorts of reasons, right? Societal shifts and changes. Is there an opportunity? So how do you cultivate these long-term, life-changing friendship relationships through a 1, 2, 5 pound, 10 pound bag, to your point illustration? Is there an opportunity for that? Because that's a great exercise. Mm-hmm. And I was, okay, well, where do I do that? My coworker, who apparently he thinks I'm the friend, I'm just showing up, meet with this guy, okay, that's a little vulnerable. Where is that environment that can occur? Again,
we have talked about, we're doing a strategic plan, trying to see whether we can take EOS, Entrepreneur Operating System principles, and apply it to Citizen 7. And one was to not have a speaker, but have a topic. So it could be priorities and time management, that we just have a meetup for 90 minutes for people. Some of it's just taking the time to focus on it. You got so many other things pulling at you, your family, and you're making a living and
pressure,
doing all those kinds of things, so that you have kind of the tyranny of the urgent. But it's a good point, and something that
a platform for greatest impact over the course of decades. Right.
Got a great question from Kevin Titchener. Is there some vitality in incorporating your wives involved in the complete transparency or bonding of bonded friendships? Or should there be a healthy separation between your wives and you, right?
Well, we both have great wives, and
did you say wives or wives?
Wives. So, do you get together as couples? How much family incorporation is there? And then there's also got to be space for you to talk about your wife sometime, right? Or struggles that you have in marriage.
We get together with the wives frequently and kind of annually take a trip somewhere. We just get together and figure out, here are the dates and where are we going. And we've had a lot of fun with that. And so just the fellowship of the 4 of us doing things like that has been really important. I think it's really important that guys have a really good guy friend. Our wives are very important, and they're, you make your most important life decision with your life partner. But sometimes that male input, someone that has, both of our wives were, they both worked until we started having kids, and they were homemakers. And so there's some things that are a little bit harder to relate. And I can tell you more than once in a big life decision, when I'm talking to Lynn, she goes, "Have you talked to Don about this?" What did he say? So, and she understands that, some of the pressures that I might have in a job, or she's going to give me her absolute best life advice experience, and she's been good at it. But then there's another input that maybe is needed.
I don't think I could add much to that.
All right. Any final words of wisdom to those listening from Steve and Don?
Well, I think one, how do you, in terms of that, finding that friend, if we really believe in prayer, and according to our faith be it unto us, or seek and you shall find, ask and it will be given, to write that down and say, hey, Lord, lead me to relationships that are nurturing or God honoring you, and say, I can't do this on my own, and just see what happens. It might be a kind of thing that says, I've been waiting for you to be that vulnerable, that humble, to say, okay. All of a sudden, you're having some fun with a person, and you realize that there's also a faith element to it.
I would say that, so I'll be transparent. I don't think I'm strong enough to go through life without a friend like this, right? And, I firmly believe God put me in that Sigma Chi house to have a relationship with Don Palmer. Simple as that. And it's worked pretty well for 50 years, and hopefully for another. How many we got?
I don't know. We'll leave that one open.
Yeah. You guys
we'll close right there.
Yeah.
Aaron, any final thoughts how this impacted you, or what you'd like to say?
No, it's great. I mean, my window view has been predominantly through they hired on at Elevate and didn't know Steve, had heard it on, had come to a couple of Citizen things over the years, whether he knew it or not. And so got to see how they co-labored together and benefited from that as a guy trying to figure out how to do nonprofit life and serve some city kids over the years. And then when Don rolled off the board, and yet still stay connected in various ways. And so I saw it primarily from the service end. And I'd hear stories about the trips and the family things, because Steve and I spent a lot of time together and as the board chair and founding board chair. So it's neat to kind of fill in the gaps a little bit. Knew that Purdue was the start, but I do think it's, and then the Citizen 7 side of it, which has been predominantly, Don and obviously Greg, obviously as well. I do think in the importance of this holistic picture for us is I live in the Near East Side. I'm trying to figure out life, raise kids, like we're all in our own seasons of trying to figure out how do I maintain friendships when, it's a grind and you're trying to be, right. You want to have joy and you want the Lord's joy in your life, but also trying to survive some days. And yet this is this long view. I want to be at a place in 20, 30 years where I can talk about some degree of depth of relationship like this, but I've got some work to do, to get there. And so I do appreciate their transparency for all of us in our seasons and stages, too.
Give the last word to our members of the Zoom. So blessed. Kevin says, so blessed by this conversation, helps me frame my friendships and discipleship better. Thanks for the awesome example of servant leadership at its best. And Glenn says, Glenn Skolnick, please forgive me if I got that wrong. For all who have crossed paths with Steve and Don, I know I speak for all of us. We are truly blessed. So thank you both for this great conversation. It's great to learn from both of you. And thank you for doing the podcast and sharing all this wisdom. And Citizen 7 has just been an encouragement to me and so many others. And you can learn more about Citizen 7 at citizen7indy.com. There's a new website. You can join heartbeat.chat, which is the directory for Citizen 7. You can find out about events, learn the history of the organization, and check out the events in October. Do you want to plug?
Todd Houston.
Yeah, please plug it.
Indiana Speaker of the House, Todd Houston, coming to Meridian Hills, 7:30 to 9, October 22nd. Love to have any listener there. I think you'll find it going to talk about polarization. How do we make government work for us? What should our role be, with our elected officials? It's not political. It's not Republican or Democrat. But it'll be a good opportunity to ask the Speaker of the House any political questions that you might have.
Wonderful. And you can find all that at citizen7indy.com. That is the number 7. So check that out. All right. Thanks so much. And we'll see you again next month.